Welcome to we usually have a Monday night Facebook Live, and this one we have a special guest, and I'm super excited to introduce you to Kimberly Ward. And we're here, and I set this up because what I see and what I've seen over the decades of practice that I've had is that a lot of people you give them the best stuff, you do the labs, we get everything ready, but you just can't follow through. They keep sabotaging themselves. They keep going off track. And a lot of it has to do with these emotional patterns that we develop as a defense early in life. And so Kimberly talks brilliantly about that. She's a trauma healing therapist. She's also a nutritional endocrinology practitioner and a transpersonal energy healing practitioner. So she's got this, realm of the biochemistry, the physiology, and the emotional energetic pieces that she blends together beautifully. And I wanted to share with you, in particular. She could talk about a lot of things, but I wanted her to share tonight in particular about these emotional energy patterns that develop as defenses early in our lives and that get in the way. So I'm going to do is take a second to pull this up on my phone so I could see who's here. I've not yet figured out the trick of being able to see it on my computer and see you and all the rest of it. So let's see. I will get it up. And if you're here, go ahead and type into the comments your name, where you're from, but also type in what is it that attracted you to come here? Like, do you feel like you resonate with this, or do you feel like some other people in your family or something like that, whatever it is for you? And it should be here. Let me put it here. So I'm looking closer to right at the camera. There we are. All right. I'm going to turn my sound off on my phone so we don't get an echo. And then I'm going to see who's here. All right. And I don't see any comments yet, so don't be shy, guys. So this is, to me, it's one of the critical components of health that a lot of practitioners overlook. Would you agree with that, Kimberly?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of practitioners intuitively know that there's something deeper going on, something that's in the way of a client's progression in their healing process. And this system gives us a tool to kind of get to the root of what's below the surface and the subconscious. And like you said earlier, these patterns that we developed when we were children really get hardwired into our system and can be really challenging to change. The older we get, the harder it can be to get to change these old patterns. And so there is a way to learn about the patterns. There's a way to help rewire the patterns so that we can create not only the health that we want, but the behaviors that we want to incorporate into our life to create health and happiness in general.
Yeah. And when you said that, the behaviors. So a lot of times, I don't know if it's happened to you or others out here, I'd love to hear, is that you find yourself wanting a certain thing and wanting to be a certain way and discussing it with yourself that the next time this person does this, you're going to stay in your calmness and you're going to do all this great stuff. And then the situation happens again and it triggers you. And that's the key word, is it triggers you. And you find yourself doing these things. And afterwards you go, huh?
Yeah, why do I keep doing that?
Why do I keep doing that?
Why do I keep doing that anymore?
Right? Yeah. It's that habit of you do it. And then you have the remorse for doing it. You're like beating yourself over the head. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Okay. And then you make the decision that you're going to do something different, and you start to do something different. And then boom, like out of nowhere, it happens again.
Yeah. I call that being hijacked by the old pattern. And the good news is it's, I think one of the hardest pieces is to recognize that you're doing it. So I think once we have the ability, we can see what we're doing, then we really have the opportunity to start working with it. But these are our learned behaviors. And if we didn't learn how to work with what I call the charge, charge meaning a situation that you have to react to or deal with. So it could be a good charge, it could be a bad charge, but we learn how to deal with a charge. And it's a kind of an organic process that our body is going to hijack and take over unless we have learned skills
to
make better choices in how to behave. And for many of us, we didn't have parents that had skills themselves and weren't able to teach us some of these skills. But the good news is we can learn these skills even as adults and incorporate them into our life and create much healthier, happier lives.
So how common is it for somebody to be able to do that? Is that like most people can if they apply, if they learn it and they know it and they catch themselves? Most people can, or is it?
Absolutely. I think I think everybody can learn, but not everybody has been given the tools to learn.
Right. I didn't have these tools until much later in life, right? So I'm thrilled to have you here. We got a lot of cool people on, Louisa and Rosalind and Lynn Rose, Megan, Sheila, and who else? Marianne and Marianne. Yes, we got a lot of people online right now. So they're watching and ready. So if you can type into the comments, and we'll address these as we get further in the presentation. What's one particular thing that you're struggling with? Like what's one, like, oh, this thing, and I always do this and I always regret it and I just want to change it. Some of the stuff, some of the behaviors that result, I will say, are not things you're even aware of yet. Right. And there are tools that Kimberly knows to be able to pull that out. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about, so where do you start? But I really wanted to talk about those 5 patterns, because I think that when people hear that, they're going to start to resonate with one or more of these patterns. And then we can talk about, like, once you know what kind of pattern you're falling into, what do you do about it? So.
So first, let's kind of define what we mean by patterns. We call them survival energy patterns. And what that means is when we were infants and small children, we started having experiences where we had to learn how to react to them. And we learn how to react based on many different things. The age we are at the time that this thing happens, or, the time that, like I said, charge. If we get charged up into something where we have to respond, depending on our age, at certain ages, we only have certain tools as an infant. We only have certain abilities as a toddler, right? We can't speak up for ourselves. We can't run and hide or run and fight. So depending on our age, depending on the tools that we have available because of our developmental capacity, also we get modeled some of these behaviors. So we might see our parents use these behaviors to help them cope with their own charge and their own experience. So it's what it is it's an adapted response to help us manage the situation and prevent total overwhelm. So we call them survival energy responses. What that means is we learn how to survive our environment by dealing with the energy charge that's a literal physiology change in our system due to our perception of an experience. So as a trauma therapist, I'm working with people that had a pretty intense charge or intense experience that was so overwhelming, we call it trauma. But it doesn't have to be that big of a deal, meaning considered a quote unquote trauma. It could be just simply an emotional experience that you had that felt overwhelming or scary to you as an infant or a young child. And what we do is we learn how to adapt to our environment, to the situation, and to what we find is appropriate or acceptable within our family system. So it might not be that a traumatic event set you up into a survival pattern. It could simply be, how did you learn to survive the family dynamics? And so for some families, for instance, anger is totally acceptable. It's totally acceptable for you to be angry, but not sad. In other families, it might be okay for you to show sadness, but not anger. Right? Some families are much more open and talk about things. Some families, it's all about performing perfectly and we put on the happy face, like everything is fine. So it's just really different. And what we have found is that there's about 5 very distinctive, very common patterns that we as children tend to choose, again, based on our age and the family environment. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and we teach how to kind of understand and break down these 5 patterns and figure out kind of where you fall in there. It's a lot of nuances, but we start with the general understanding that there are 5 common patterns. The patterns are adaptive tools that we learn so that we can prevent total overwhelm and we can react in a situation with the tools that we have at hand. So the 5 patterns are what we work with, and it's a great map because it helps us as a practitioner. It helps me have common language with my clients. It also has helped me immensely within my family structure. Is like I can teach the people around me different patterns, and we can learn how to work with our own pattern, and we can learn to recognize and work with other people's patterns,
Yeah.
so that we're communicating more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I said in my email when I announced this, that we were going to do this, is that it helps in family dynamics, work dynamics, your own health, self-care, your own internal dynamics for taking care of yourself.
Right.
And just even for me, it improved even my extended family, being able to understand where they were coming from and not react to what I perceived as their attacks.
Right.
So really good. One thing I want to go back to, and then we can go forward, is you talked about earlier the trauma, and as a trauma therapist, would some of those things, those traumas or these early childhood things, would they be considered PTSD? Because people talk a lot about PTSD.
Right. So when we talk about PTSD, what we're really thinking about is in the present moment, I am reminded of something from the past that wasn't resolved, that feels overwhelming in my system. And I get triggered by that memory into survival physiology in the present moment.
Yeah.
So when we say PTSD and we call it post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma is really hard to define, because trauma is an individual experience of, I can't say no. I was stuck in a situation where I didn't get to say no. So a lot of that is perception, not just the experience itself, but the perception and the tools I had to manage my experience. So one event that was traumatic for one person will not necessarily be traumatic for another person. So if you have PTSD, it's not because of the circumstances you are in. It's because your system didn't have the tools that it needed to resolve itself out of that situation, and it's still in your body.
Yeah.
And you were in the present moment triggered by an unresolved trauma from the past or situation from the past where you were stuck in an inability to respond well, and it's still alive in your body. So you're going around your day-to-day experience and you smell something that takes you back and brings up an experience that we might define as PTSD. What that really is your body's system is hijacking you into the past trauma response. And then in the moment, we're not living presently in the moment, we're being pulled back into the past trauma. And again, trauma is really individual.
It's relative, right?
That's
so
relative.
does this work for the severe, understanding these patterns and learning to resolve, and the work you do, does that work for people who have true PTSD, like in the sense that we think of it, like it was a big trauma, like being in the Gulf War, or having to kill people, and those are huge traumas.
Right. So it works, this system that we work with works with traumas that we might call minor traumatic situations and really big traumatic situations, right? Because really the definition of minor or major is really still relative to the person and their resources. So I would say, yes, it works. It's a system in place to help us learn to work with our own experience, our own charge, be able to manage our physiology, consciously manage our physiology. When we use the word triggered, like you used earlier, what we're really talking about is something shows up that we didn't expect, like something we were triggered into a response. So something reminded us from the past, and we're now responding in the present moment from a past memory. That's really what a trigger is. So the trigger can be positive, or it can be more severe from a traumatic experience that hasn't been resolved. So the short answer is yes, we can work with pretty big overwhelming traumas, what we might define as a PTSD reaction. And we can work with things that might be so subtle, it might not seem like it's a real big hindrance in your life, but yet it might be disruption that's enough, that's uncomfortable, that you want to work with it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting when you say that, I'm reminded that there are things like that I would just think about, like, why did that incident, why, you know what I mean? It seems minor to me. And then when we discover it, or go through this process of discovery, you know, wow, that really had a bigger impact. So sometimes I think when you bring to consciousness some of these so-called traumas, they don't seem like they should be traumas to you as the adult, but as that small child, infant, toddler, teen, they were.
Right. And if we had an experience that we didn't get to fully process and discharge out of our system, then it might be stuck in us many, many, many years later.
Yeah.
Many years later. And when we get into a situation where we have to be defensive, we have to come up with a way to protect ourselves from overwhelm. That's a defense. We have to defend from something that feels overwhelming externally. Then what we do is we find, oh, that worked. So the next time something stressful comes up, we do what worked last time. And then the next time we do the same thing over and over again. So many times it becomes a habitual pattern that is a subconscious pattern. And that's what we are really talking about when we talk about the 5 survival patterns. It's how did we manage our charge during early stress? It worked. We kept doing it. It worked as kids, but now as adults, it's not so effective. It's not the best choice, but we're so hardwired into it because we've done it so many times. It's a subconscious habit that's really wired into our nervous system. And so then it becomes really hard to change. Like, we know we're doing it, but we can't stop. We know we keep stress eating. We want to stop stress eating, but we can't seem to stop doing it. We know we get angry really quickly with our loved ones. We don't like that we do that, but we keep doing it, even though we know we're doing it. And so the 5 patterns gives us a map to understand the 5 most common ways we flow the charge of stress or trauma, and then gives us some solutions for each.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask Kimberly to describe those 5 patterns for us. But what I want you guys out there to do is have a piece of paper or something handy that you can jot things down. Because as she speaks, you know, you might just write the numbers 1 to 5 and just think as she speaks, you know, when you go, whoa, that's me, right? Jot some notes down. So at the end, and then we'll share with you at the end a quiz that you can take to actually see where you fit in the patterns. So, reveal.
Awesome. Well, so the first thing to remember is it's typically you have more than one pattern that you use. Remember, it's a tool. The pattern is a tool. You are not your pattern. You use these patterns to help you function and deal and respond with things in life. And there's so much detail. This is like one of my favorite topics in the whole world, which is why I teach and use this material all the time. And I just can't get enough of it. So you could study it for years. So this is a very brief overview. But as a somatic trauma therapist, I am looking at these patterns from an energetic, physiological perspective. Okay. And we're going to go through it in the timeline of the earliest pattern is correlated to a tool you had to use as an infant, even before birth, like gestation, and the first few months of life. Okay. And each pattern will kind of move up in developmental stages. So the first pattern that we talk about is called the leaving pattern. And it's called the leaving pattern because it's that earliest stage of development, gestational stage or early infancy. And at that stage, we don't have a lot of tools to respond in the world, right? One of the only things we can do if we feel overwhelmed and our needs aren't being met is to leave mentally and emotionally. So if it doesn't feel safe in the body and we don't have capacity for our fight or flight response because it hasn't developed yet, right? We have no ability to regulate our own system as an infant. Right? So we can't get up and run. We can't describe our needs in words.
Right.
So what we can do is check out. So the leaving pattern, the energy of a leaving pattern situation is to come up and out of the body.
Mm.
So this pattern is great for those people that didn't have any other options. And often it's associated with that early years, but we could use this at any time in life. Is it feels overwhelming in the body. I don't have any other choices. So I'm going to live in the creative space out here, in
Mm.
the mental space, in the creative world, in the spiritual world. And then what happens is the body feels very empty. So if it didn't feel safe in the body, or you didn't have any other tools to survive a stressful situation in your environment, you learn to leave. So of
Is
course you're
this
still in the
common
body, but your
abuse?
consciousness and your awareness is more focused on your mental experience and your emotional, or your spiritual experience.
Yeah. Is this common pattern with kids who are either abused or there's abuse going on in the home? Like mom is, being beaten up or whatever, or another
Yeah.
child is? Is that a common pattern?
All 5 patterns can happen if there's abuse.
Okay.
So typically, if the stress and or abuse was at the earliest stages, gestational, it could have been the mother's abuse during pregnancy or the mother's trauma during pregnancy. It can be birth trauma, right, during the labor and delivery process or the first few months of life. This one, so regardless of the severity of the experience,
Yeah.
if the disruption to the system happens, or a stress happens at this early stage, really one of the only options is to check out mentally, right? But it is also a viable tool for when you're older. So an older child could still pick this pattern.
Yeah.
So it's a tool that is picked most often during the earliest stages, but it is a tool that you could use at any time.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked that because I've heard, patients over the years say that they were abused at certain periods and then they just didn't remember it. And
Right.
because they checked out because they had to. And then, through therapy and other things, they were able to remember, oh, no wonder.
Well, one of the things that I've learned, and this is a more advanced concept, is that there's a difference between the leaving pattern and dissociation from a horrible trauma.
Okay.
But they look similar,
They look-
because being dissociated and checked out, you're more creative, you're up here, you're checked out, your awareness is not fully embodied.
Mm.
And that can happen from a trauma, but it can also be part of this survival pattern. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that's number one. And we're going to come back around, guys, and just talk about what are some of the gifts in each of these, or unless
Okay.
you want to do that right now.
We can go through the gifts because it really is
Okay.
very, it's, I think it's helpful to understand because it's a similar personality style. I am checked out and I'm overwhelmed, but then that means I'm really comfortable in the creative space, in the intellectual space, or the spiritual space. So these people are incredibly creative, or incredibly smart, and incredibly spiritual.
Got it.
So they have a lot of ability to use their mind, but they're not as in tune to their body. They're not as grounded. And as you learn these patterns more, you'll see there's a physical structure that the body grows into when they use this pattern predominantly. So that's, really
More advanced.
detailed information.
Time for that.
But there's a physiological change in the body when we use a different pattern. So when we flow our energy differently, the body's structure will change. So if you are predominantly a leaving pattern person, you tend to be lighter, thinner, more wiry, less embodied, less grounded.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. And those of you who are on, I recognize a few names who are on the list for the Dancing with Defenses course. We'll tell you more about that later, but that you're going to get a lot more detail in there.
Yeah, this is a small teaser, right?
Just a teaser. But it's good information, right? To understand and to figure out, oh, that's why I do that.
Yeah.
So number 2, what's number 2?
So number 2 is called the merging pattern. And this is typically a pattern that develops a little bit later. So after the infancy stage, where we're getting closer to a little bit more independence, kind of not quite toddler, but like 6 months to 18 months, kind of where we're moving into some ability to start communicating a little bit more and starting to feel a little bit separate from mom, but we're still very dependent on mom and caregivers. And during this phase, we are very much in the nursing stage where we're being fed very intimately. We're still being changed. We can't change ourselves. We can't do anything for ourselves still, right? So we're still dependent on mom and dad. And in this stage, we call it the merging pattern, because this is a stage where if the connection with parents or the environment is disrupted, then it's the child is left feeling very needy for that caregiver. And so they tend to need to merge with another person, as if a young baby who's nursing with mom is merging with mom.
Yeah.
Merging, they need to merge. So the merging pattern is somebody that very much wants connection with another person. So they feel like they need to manage their overwhelming situation. They need to merge with another being. The leaving pattern checks out when they're overwhelmed, don't want to be around other people. The merging pattern is searching for somebody to connect into, to merge with. And the beautiful side of this pattern is they're incredibly open, loving, generous, beautiful people that are very open-hearted people.
Yeah.
They're very much into the connection and emotion.
Yeah.
But the negative side of that can be they can feel kind of like a victim. They kind of feel like they can't do it themselves because they're still at that stage. They were still absolutely dependent on mom and dad and people to help them, because they weren't developed enough to help themselves. So the merging pattern tends to be then energetically searching, reaching, and they tend to be a little more collapsed.
Cool. Wow. And so when the merging pattern, would you say the people who are into the codependent type relationships? Yeah.
Exactly.
Have to be like,
yeah. And sometimes it's again, this is all very complicated. This is just a teaser, but there's also a component of some merging pattern people where they're totally unaware of their own needs. Typical merging pattern person is feeling very needy. I need you, I need you, I need to connect. The compensated merging, which would be kind of the same side or different side of the same coin, is I'm not aware of my own needs, but I need to take care of you. I feel okay as long as I'm taking care of things for you, then maybe you'll take care of me too, and I'll feel safer.
the martyr thing.
And that's a very codependent piece of the merging pattern. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Number 3.
So the next pattern is called the enduring pattern. The enduring pattern, when they feel overwhelmed, they take that charge into their system and they hold on to it and they kind of push it down and put up with it. They endure it. They don't like confrontation. They're a little uncomfortable with that. So they often on the outside look like they're fine, but on the inside, they're like very frustrated with it, but they don't move the energy. Leaving pattern moves out, merging pattern searches to connect, the enduring pattern pushes it down and holds it. Often these people feel stuck. They say that often, I'm stuck. They don't move their charge very well. And so they might be very nice and pleasing on the outside, outwardly compliant, but inwardly defiant, but they don't show it.
They don't
hold it, right? Now, these people are incredibly able to cope with really intense things. They're very loyal. They're very grounded people, but they don't move their charge. And that, of course, and all of these are spectrums, right? There's some people on the extreme end of this pattern would be really push down all their emotions, push down all of their energy, hold it. These people can be very stocky. They tend to be very solid and grounded, whereas like the leaving pattern is kind of light and airy and not as grounded. The enduring pattern is very solid, very grounded, and very stocky, and a little bit collapsed in the front as well.
So when you say the extreme end, I'm thinking people who are passive aggressive who say, yeah, and then they just do it their way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's very much a passive aggressive component to this pattern as well. And it's also, they really truly do not like conflict. So it's tough for them because, and often this is grounded in an experience in the toddler years where they're starting to experiment with their own power, their own autonomy. And if that didn't get honored in their childhood situation, they don't feel their own power and their own autonomy.
Yeah.
And so they can feel very much pressured by the outside. Or if they were humiliated, then they don't want to be seen. They hide. They don't want to be seen because they don't want to risk being humiliated or being wrong. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. It's like they have this sense of, well, I'm not even going to try because I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
So if you had a really strict parent that couldn't tolerate your own independence and your own autonomy or your own power, it might have been stifled. And so then you grow up uncomfortable with your own power, uncomfortable asserting your own power. So then the passive aggressive stuff can show up.
And show up.
Yeah.
And the positive side, did I miss it? Did the positive?
They're incredibly grounded. They're incredibly able to tolerate really intense situations. So they can hold a lot of challenging things. And they're, if you need to get something done, if you need to move, the enduring pattern person is a very loyal friend. They're going to show up. They're going to help you. They can tolerate all the stress very, very well. Yeah, they're very fair. They can see both sides. They want to be fair. One of the hard things about this pattern is they have a very strong inner critic. Really, really difficult time kind of overcoming their own inner critic. And they're really uncomfortable with being seen. And so it's sometimes very hard for them to try new things because that was stifled when they were children. So they don't feel very confident in trying new things. They don't want to be seen.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Number 4.
So the next one is called the Challenger Defender. And this is going to be a little bit older stage of development where they have their own sense of autonomy and they're more comfortable with their own power. But they often have a hard time holding a charge. So what this person does with their energy is the energy comes in and it can be intense for them to hold on to the charge. So they can throw it out at you. And they sometimes throw it out verbally. They can throw it out physically. So Challenger Defender, they can challenge situations. So they're very courageous. They're very capable of holding a high, intense charge. They're incredible leaders. They're very strong-willed. They can tolerate a lot of responsibility. But when they feel maxed out or overwhelmed, then they throw out the charge. So they can be challenging for a personality like the leaving pattern where it's uncomfortable to be around that much charge, or the enduring pattern where they just want to hide. The Challenger Defender pattern can be on the positive side, incredible leaders, incredible innovators, right? They defend the underdog to the death. Challenger Defender, right? Hence the name. They are really proactive in wanting to see change. They are very comfortable using their charge in a powerful situation. But the downside of that can be very overwhelming to other people. And it can be very offensive to some people if they can't handle the charge being thrown at them.
Got it. So hopefully you guys are taking notes and seeing which of these you might fit into. And again, like Kimberly said, you might fit into several of these.
Yeah. And when you think about your core or your main predominant character, think about what do you do when you're most extremely overwhelmed? If you hit that tipping point of you're at a 10 out of 0 to 10, 10 being the most stressed, what do you do? Do you tend to throw it at somebody? Are you like, I can't take it, so I'm going to blame you? Throw it back at you? That's what a Challenger Defender would do in their extreme of the spectrum.
Right. And it doesn't mean that this is the way you are in life. And there's no negative, there's no shame about being any one of these, right? We all have developed.
They're tools. They're simply strategies that we develop to use to help us overwhelm. And I think that they're all in the healthy perspective. Each pattern has a healthy space within it in the spectrum. And as we learn to work with our system, we can learn to pick and choose the best tool in the moment. Typically, when we say we're triggered into the pattern, it's because we're unconsciously thrown into our hardwired pattern.
Yeah.
But we can learn to work with it. And in the moment, we can then choose, is it better for me to use my power like a challenger defender? Or is it better for me to soften a little bit, maybe,
Yeah.
or think more intellectually about it like a leaving pattern person? So we have choice.
We have
We have
choice. And
choice.
that's what I think for me in learning these has been the most empowering,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Learning
Yeah.
how to handle that, because I'm definitely in that 4 category, and to be able to learn to stop in the moment and, and not always, none of us are perfect, right?
But it's a way for us to be able to recognize what we're doing with our charge and then be able to slow down and make a decision. Is this the best tool for me to use?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
not?
The decision part is important, right? Because when we're thrown into a pattern, a neurologic pathway pattern that we've done for a long time, it just happens. And then you think about it usually. And when you
Right.
learn, you can learn what are the situations that are likely to trigger that pattern, and then catch yourself before the hardwiring takes over.
Right. Right. And you use it purposefully.
Yes.
Right. I want to go into my ability. The challenger defender has capacity to deal with very high stress situations that require a lot of energy and a lot of will. And so I want to tune into that tool when it's appropriate.
Right.
And I want to be able to tame that a little bit when it's not appropriate and not useful. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's a challenger defender is number 4. And then the last one we call the achiever pattern. So this is going to be the highest of the developmental stage, where we're talking like a 4 or 5-year-old child. And then often this can kind of be triggered also by kind of preteen years, puberty years.
Yeah.
But this one is when we feel overwhelmed in the moment, and we learn that if we perform perfectly, we'll be safe. So we get wired into the behavior of achieving, overachieving, of perfectionism. And that shows up in the body in a very rigid way. Whereas the challenger defender will take the charge and throw it out. The rigid person holds it very tightly and compactly. They'll have very perfect posture, and their muscles can be very tight and rigid because the energy is held in and compact so they can perform perfectly. And these people can perform, and they are your top athletes, right? They're your people that have any kind of achievement, that are in extreme achievements. And so that's the extreme end, is like the Olympic athletes. But then there's also just people that have this need to be perfect in everything that they do. They're very organized. They're very dedicated to doing a good job. If you need something organized and done well, hire a achiever personality. They have great skills, but they get stuck in I am my performance. They're not as in tune with their internal being. And again, that is because their environment, they sensed that they are safer if they perform.
Yep.
And it's not safe to be tuned in with my internal self. So when they get charged up, they hold on, they get rigid, and they perform perfectly. And these people often have a really hard time tuning into what they really feel inside, because they're so focused on their performance. So again, a great tool to use when you have to perform and when you need to get good at something, right? When you need to have the tenacity to keep going and achieve it. It's a great tool, but it's not always the most appropriate use of your charge in the moment.
Right. And learning how to use it appropriately
Mm-hmm.
be very successful, and really, in terms of the achievement in the organization and all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they all have uses, and there's always a spectrum. And I think the goal is to become aware of how you move your own charge, right? All of these patterns move charge in a different way in their body. They all have associated belief systems. They all have different inner critics that are, speaking at them. They all have different ways that they express themselves. And so we might start to think of those patterns as really as our true personality. And really what it is is a tool to help you deal with overwhelm. And often, if we're very much wired into the defense, our true self isn't able to show up
Yeah.
because we're defended. These are defensive patterns. And when we learn to work with the patterns in an appropriate way in the present moment and pick and choose the way we deal with it, pick and choose the pattern that would best fit the situation, then our true essence, our true inner personality can really show up.
Yeah. I think it's amazing how we can use these tools. And I just opened up the chat to see if we can answer some questions. And then I just like to have you give like maybe 3 steps where people can take what they've learned today and just start using it. And then I want to talk about how they can delve further into this.
Okay.
So let me just see what people are asking and what people are saying. Let's see. We just have one, Marianne. Let's see. Here's it. Megan says, from Katie, Rosalind. Oh, Rosalind. Where did I see Megan? Oh, let me go. Rosalind from Katie. Hello, everybody. I'm dealing with emotional issues with family right now and need pathway choices to extricate myself from it. And Megan from Alberta says one of the big challenges when working with clients is wanting to understand more and help people overcome their health. So these are in answers to the question when I said, what are you here for? Hopefully some of these tools can help you a lot, because really not just recognizing your pattern, but recognizing your client's pattern is going to help you to know how to communicate to get through. Stress from relationship. Karen Lynn said emotional eating. Sheila Marshall, situations where people are disrespecting my time. We talk about that a little bit. Showing up late or not at all. Frustration with the lack of respect of me and my time spins me up. Strong food cravings that don't go away until food is eating. Lynn Rose, I don't like food prep. Leaving it all related to being here's the question, is leaving at all related to being introverted? This is Rob.
Well, that's a really good question. I often, the leaving pattern person is very introverted. They're more interested in their intellectual or creative experience than they are with connecting with other people and having interaction.
Lynn Rose, I endure my merging.
I endure my merging. That's funny.
Dean wants to know, what do you mean by moving the charge?
Moving the charge. So when there's an experience, so us as human beings, we have a physical body that is living in a world. We are wired by our nervous system to sense either danger or safety. The nervous system senses that there is something happening. I call that a charge. Your body is wired to deal with the charge. We learn how to manage our charge. As children, when we are born, humans are not capable of regulating their own charge. We can't regulate our temperature as infants, right? We can't regulate our bowels as infants. We can't regulate our emotions as infants. These are learned things. So we have automatic physiological responses based on how old we are. As we age, we have more and more skills, just like our immune system develops with age, our ability to regulate our system develops with age, our ability to interact with our environment grows with our developmental stages. So a charge is something that happens to us, and it could be a positive charge or negative charge. It's our own perception of whether it's positive or negative, but our system has to respond to something that's happening. So the something that's happening I refer to as a charge. So a charge happens, I have to decide how to respond. Most of the responses that human beings have on this planet right now are subconscious, based in how did we try and manage and deal with stress or charge as infants, and then as toddlers, and then as young people. So and we all get disrupted in our developmental stages in some way, shape, or form. It could be an emotional disruption. It could be a traumatic disruption. It could be something simple as we moved to a different place. It could be another child was born into the family. It could be that mom got sick. It could be that dad lost his job. It could be a tsunami hit, the house burnt down. These are all experiences. It could be my teacher said something and I really took it personally and it really disrupted me. That's a charge. Right? So the charge is something that happened to us. Our body is responding to the charge, and most people walk around on this planet swimming in the hormones of stress because we are dealing with not only toxic environments, we're dealing with things that humans weren't really meant to deal with on a daily basis. So we have these things that our system is sensing and as a threat, right? Even Wi-Fi, your system can sense that as a threat. And so your internal self, your nervous system is deciding 24/7, it's deciding, is what I'm noticing out in the world there, consciously and subconsciously, safe or dangerous?
Yep.
So it's deciding, is this charge safe or dangerous? And typically we're responding based on how we responded as kids, how we learned to respond to survive our environment as children, right? Remember, we couldn't regulate our own system. We depended on mom and dad to do that. If they were dysregulated, if they weren't calm and able to help calm us down, we didn't learn how to regulate.
Yep. Yeah, great answer. Great answer. I'm hearing people mentioning like what parts they're in, so I'd love to read that. And I think this one, Rob is saying he's just making this as a statement, but I'd love to hear what your opinion is. Enduring leavers often marry defender challenger.
Okay. I think that is very true, that we don't typically marry someone of the exact same pattern that we are. Right? We are often kind of subconsciously magnetically attracted to people, often that are like our parents, because it's familiar. So if you are familiar with a challenger defender person that maybe was a parent, you might end up being married to them. Yes, that's true. And the good news is, though, that we can learn to work with the whole spectrum of the pattern. Right? We can learn to recognize it in ourselves, but when it comes to relationships, this has been the most important tool for me in my own personal relationship and growth of my personal relationship, is to be able to recognize when I am in my defensive pattern, to recognize my partners and my loved ones' pattern. So instead of going, what a jerk, he's doing it again, I go, oh yeah, he's in his pattern.
Yeah.
He's in a survival pattern. He's overwhelmed about something. He's stressed about something.
Yeah.
Right. And I know what the pattern is now, and I have tools to work with their pattern. So regardless of what pattern you're married to, which is typically not the same pattern that you are, right? You can learn some tools to help navigate it, so that when you notice they're in pattern, you can step back, slow down, and get yourself in check and work with their pattern.
Yeah. That's so important. I can just imagine a household of two challenger defenders.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, three.
Yeah.
Marianne and Diane both say they see parts of all five in them. Is that common?
Yeah, that's very common. And like I said, there usually is a predominant pattern. And again, I say when you're the most stressed ever, when you're in the most overwhelmed, do you hide? Do you check out? Do you look for somebody to help fix it for you? Do you get mad and angry and throw out your energy at them? Or do you just perform perfectly and fix it, find a solution, right? So you can think about, what do you do in the most extreme? Then there's, kind of overlays of these other patterns as well. And it is so complicated. We really, even with the little quiz we have, it's still something that can take a while to really understand about yourself. And what I found for myself is that with certain people, I tend to utilize certain patterns more often. So with my mom, I'm going to use a different pattern than I do with my husband or my clients or my boss, right? I'm going to use a different pattern in different situations. And really, like I said, really, the goal would be to be able to be in charge of what pattern you choose in the moment, so that you have access to all of these tools and you pick one that's most useful for you in the present time. When we're triggered, we're using a tool from the past, right? From a past memory, automatic pilot, go into whatever that most predominant pattern is typically.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking of me as a 3-4-year-old when I did something they didn't like, and they were going, I'm going to spank you. And I'm like, hell you will. And I'd be running around the house and pushing them away and hitting them. And like it developed early on. It developed really early on.
Right. So you had the capacity to feel your own power, your own charge, right?
Yeah.
And to utilize that. But a leaving pattern person wouldn't have that same capacity, right? That wasn't developed in them yet. Right. So they wouldn't react the same way that you would have. Right.
Yeah. Alma has the question of the day. Once you're in the pattern and recognize you're in it, what's the best way to get out of it?
Oh boy, that's taken years for me to master, but I can give you an idea.
Yeah.
The first step really is awareness. That's why the map is so helpful, because it gives you a concept of what are kind of the options that people typically do. Then you can kind of reference that. What am I doing in the present moment? So you got to first slow down. When you notice that you're triggered into a pattern and you're defensive, then and defensiveness doesn't usually feel good, right? So you don't feel good, you're defended, you slow down and you pay attention. So you're going to notice, and I, as a somatic trauma therapist, I really teach people how to pay attention to the charge in the body. What is your body doing with the charge? So that's one way, is to tune in to your own body. What is happening? Once you have awareness around it, I think the next thing is not to try and change it immediately, but to get in relationship with it and have respect for it. Because the truth is, it was a tool that we used when we were young and we didn't have any other options, and it worked. We survived overwhelming situations. So having respect for it has really been a game changer for me and my clients. And I think that's because when we can have respect for the pattern, we can have more compassion for ourselves. And when we can have compassion and understanding for ourselves and our loved ones and our clients, and have compassion, that's the space that healing happens and change takes place. Transformation takes place in a space of compassion and love, not in a space of hate. Like, I hate this about myself, is not the place to heal. But you can go, oh, okay, I hate that I do that when I'm angry. I don't like that about myself. We can step back and go, oh, this is what I'm doing because I'm upset, because I'm scared. Oh, okay, here's what I'm doing. Wow. That's the only option I had when I was young. That's why I keep doing it. But now in the present moment, I can have respect for what I needed in the past and say, wait, I don't need it anymore. Then we start to work on changing it from that place of compassion and love. We don't change it when we're charged up, right? So let's talk about stress eating. I know I find myself eating the ice cream again. Okay, I'm beating myself up. Oh, you're such an idiot. Why do you keep doing this? You're on a diet. You can't be doing all of that self-talk. You reckon, oh, I'm in my pattern. I am responding to something that has stressed me out. I'm trying to regulate my system. And in the past, I used food as a tool to try and regulate my system and feel okay, to feel safe, to feel calm. And I just keep eating. Oh, this is what I'm doing. Do it with awareness. Don't try and change it immediately. Go, oh, this is what I'm doing. Pay attention to the subtleties of the energy in your system. This is what it feels like when I'm overwhelmed. This is why I'm eating this ice cream. Like, really settle into that instead of hating it about yourself. settle into it, watch it, and then go, wow, you know what, it worked. It was a tool that worked in the past. I'm going to have respect for it now. I've shifted my energy. I've shifted my state. Instead of stress eating, I hate myself that I'm doing this, but I can't stop. I have a compassion for it. There was a reason for it. I can respect it. Now my state has shifted. Now I'm in a place that I can start to work with it. And that's really what we teach you in the classes that we offer.
Yeah. So tell us about the class and then we'll finish the questions because we have one coming up. When is it? June 1st or something?
June 1st, it starts soon, like next week. Yeah. Yeah. So this course is called Dancing with Defenses. And of course, defenses is when we're in our stress response because we feel overwhelmed and we're not sure how to handle things. We go into a defensive response. So the course is called Dancing with Defenses because we're teaching people about the 5 survival energy patterns that are defended patterns that we get into, and we go over exactly what we've been talking about today. We teach, there's 5 master courses, so we have a full like 90-minute class on each of the patterns, and we teach you
2 hours actually.
Oh, is it 2 hours for each one? Yeah. And so it's a full class on each of the 5 patterns where we go into how do you get wired into the pattern? What are the typical scenarios? Like the leaving pattern, it might have been a toxic environment. It might have been a birth trauma. It might have been an early surgery. You know, so what are the possible reasons to get wired into it? What are the common traits of this person? What are their core belief systems? What do we do with the energy? How do they move their energy or their charge in that pattern? And then how to work with it and heal it. So each pattern gets a full class of its own.
Great.
And then we also have the ability to participate in what we call the healing transformation, where we go into more personal experience of working with the pattern so that you can have a little bit more personalized support on working with it if it's your own pattern, or we often have a lot of the pieces of different patterns within us. So working with that pattern within ourselves, and if we have loved ones in that pattern, some tools on how to work with it. And so the master class is really a more it's very experiential. You're going to learn what it feels like to be if you're triggered in that particular pattern. We actually give you an exercise to do that helps you understand what it feels like to be in the pattern. If it's your pattern, it's totally familiar to you. But if it's not your pattern, it's really helpful to learn what it might feel like to somebody in that pattern so you can have more compassion for your loved ones that are in that pattern. Yeah, so it's a very experiential, but it's also, you're going to learn a lot of specifics about the pattern, experience what it's like to be in the pattern, and some tools to work with the pattern. And then we have the Healing Transformation series, which is going to go deeper into the healing process if you're really wanting to have that support.
And that's in between each class. So and you'll work in a group of at most 15.
At the most, we're capping it. So it's a small group process.
So small group process with one of the certified instructors taking you through experientially what that's about. So